Welcome on Seaver podcast. In this podcast, we will introduce the CFIT and CFIT Pulse and ECG belt, all new devices which monitor the horse's health and performance. At Seaver, we imagine and develop technology so that the health and wellness of horses always remain at the heart of the rider's commitment. We believe that being able to back up one's riding feeling with concrete data provided by technology can only strengthen the link between a rider and his horse. Do ECG, fitness shape test, or performance V140 on V220 seem particularly technical to you? Do you ever feel a bit lost when assessing the evolution of your horse from one training session to another? Then, listening to this podcast is warmly recommended. In the next couple of episodes, we will focus on various topics such as understanding the energy used by your horse in training, checking his trot symmetry, detecting a cardiac irregularity, measuring the stress level of the horse, or figuring out how to use Seaver technology on a daily basis. Have a great listening! In this episode, we're going to talk about locomotion and the organization of a training session. The first feature we're going to focus on is trot symmetry. So what is the symmetry of my horse? Symmetry implies that both forelimbs and both hind limbs are used equivalently. A sound horse moving in a straight line and on the flat surface should have symmetrical movements. Indeed, he should apply the same weight to the left and right forelimbs, and the same goes for the hind limbs. So what exactly does your Seaver connected equipment measure? Seaver measures the symmetry of your horse at the trot and in a straight line in order to compare the two half-trot strides. They should be as similar as possible. This datum is calculated every 10 seconds of straight line consecutive trotting and is represented by a grade in percentage that evolves during the session. For a sound horse, the score is usually between 70 and 100%. Please mention that calculations are only made when your horse is trotting for at least 10 seconds and in a straight line. In other cases, this grade has no meaning and will have a value of 0 on the graph. For example, when you work in a small space, let's say a 20 per 60 meter indoor riding arena, this duration can only be reached on a perfectly straight diagonal. So do not worry if no score is obtained during this kind of session, and the same applies for a longines session or liberty training, where it's actually rare to put the horse on a straight line long enough, even when changing circles. Why is it so interesting to know if your horse is moving symmetrically? Ideally, symmetry should increase throughout the session because horses are often less at ease at the beginning of the warm-up, and with the training, the better trained a horse will be, the better he will be able to counterbalance his natural dissymmetry. The symmetry figures will allow you to check if your horse moves symmetrically and see the evolution of symmetry as you work and from one session to another. In case of sudden decrease of symmetry over several sessions, it might be interesting to ask a professional, a coach, a vet, or an osteopath for their opinion. Good to know that lateral work and outdoor training on deep or hard grounds can alter the symmetry grade. No foot, no horse. The major benefit of the symmetry features for any rider is to be able to detect a weakness or lameness before it is visible and therefore act to prevent the problem from getting worse and allow for a faster recovery. Indeed, the diagonal pair with the lowest percentage of the two is the one that spends the least time touching the ground. It is thus the weak diagonal on which the horse bears the least weight. Below 40%, it's likely that the horse is suffering from lameness. It is useful to monitor the evolution of symmetry within the same sessions thanks to the graph. In addition, with the average, you will be able to see this evolution for the different training sessions performed. The grade itself is of little importance, except to monitor the evolution. unless it falls below 40%, in which case a lameness will be likely to appear. It's important to monitor the evolution of symmetry within the same session with a curve and between the different sessions with the average. Another feature that you can check with Seaver is the time spent at each gate. We all know that there is no ideal distribution of working time at each gate. It depends on various factors, such as the physical condition of your horse or the objective you set for your session, and can be changed from one training session to another if needed. In the Locomotion tab, you will see the total time you spent at each gate in percentage during your last training. Therefore, this gives you a good understanding of the different training phases, such as warm-up and cool-down or recovery, and allows you to have a better idea of the intensity level of your training session. Why is it so relevant for riders to be able to check that? We often tend to overestimate the time spent trotting and in particular cantering, especially because we reflect in terms of distance covered, which is necessarily more important at these gates and not time. It is common to go for 1 hour trotting and realize that, in the end, we spent only 20 minutes trotting. Thanks to Seaver, you will have an overall idea of the time you spent at each gate and thus become aware of whether one gate prevailed to make potential adjustments in your next sessions. Let's talk now about the allocation of time spent at each lead. Once again, we often tend to spend more time at one particular lead, insisting too harshly on one side because of a difficulty or a stiffness of your horse can cause stress, early fatigue, and even a muscular asymmetry in your horse in the long run. And last but not least, Seaver provides you some data about your horse's elevation. So does your horse have a good elevation? Elevation corresponds to the range of your horse's vertical displacement. It enables gait verticality training. The higher the elevation at a gate will be, the bouncier your horse will be. It's worth noting that if a dressage rider tries to increase these values through work, other disciplines require a swimming horse with a low elevation, such as endurance to limit fatigue, or the Western pleasure. Comparing the elevation during your different exercises can be useful to understand what will help you improve it. It should be remembered that elevation tends to increase with work on ground poles or cavaletti, for example. To complete this first part of the episode, I have asked Libby Seed to be our guest and to talk about the way she warms up her horses for dressage, eventing, and jumping courses. Here is our conversation. Hi, Libby. Thanks a lot for accepting our invitation to record this short podcast, the Seaver podcast. For starter, and as a first question, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Libby. I'm a 5-star event rider from the UK. I've ridden on the Young Rider British teams and the Pony teams, and I competed at the Po 5-star events, Le Moulin and Burley.
Nice. Thank you very much. So you're now a professional rider. You have horses, plenty of horses. You have competed on the major eventing competitions here in Europe. Today, I would like to talk with you about the warm-up, like before a jumping session or before a competition, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Just to start, can you tell me how important and significant is this warm-up session in your opinion?
Very, very important. I mean, your warm-up is what prepares you to go into the competition, into the ring to do a good job. So if you do a bad warm-up, there's no way you can go into the ring and do a good job within the ring. So it's very, very important.
And do you do differently when you're at home before like jumping session or cross session? And when you're at the show, what do you do differently?
So for me, it's quite important to try and not change too much between jumping at home and then going to the competition. Especially if you have a system for your horse that works for your horse. It's quite easy to get distracted when everyone else is in the warm-up and jumping big jumps and going really fast around the warm-up. It's very easy to get distracted and worried about what everyone else is doing. So for me, it's very much to try and just keep it the same as I would at home, to keep my horses with me and thinking the same way we always do, to try and keep everything calm and not get stressed about the whole pressure of an event and that sort of thing.
Okay. For you, how long should this last? A good warm-up, how long is it?
So it very much so depends on the horse. I've got a couple of horses who are very, very polar opposites and different. So, for example, my top horse, who's competing at 4-star at the moment, she gets very, very overexcited if I have her in the warm up for too long. So for her, it's a case of making sure her muscles are warm and she's with me, and we're doing lots of transitions and keeping her muscles and her brain engaged without having too long in the warm up for her to sort of realise that she's at a very exciting competition, and get overexcited. But then, it's equally important to take the time for her muscles to be warm. So for her, probably about half an hour, but for an older horse or one who needs a bit more time to relax and look around, maybe about 40 minutes, but it very much so depends on the horse.
Okay. And what do you expect out of this warm-up? Like, what's the feeling that you expect to feel, to make sure that you're ready and to make you think that, okay, she's or he is ready now?
So for me, it's just trying to repeat what you would get in your training, to get as much out of the horse in the warm-up as you would if you were training at home. So the horse needs to be listening to you, to be on your aids, not to be getting excited about the flags or the flowers or the crowds. They have to be switched on to what you're wanting them to do, and just not focusing too much on the other horses. So whatever you're asking them to do, they need to be with you and to do it without thinking too much about what's going on around them.
Yeah. Could you detail a little bit like a regular typical warm-up with your main horses or your main horse? What do
Yeah.
you do and how long?
Okay, so for the dressage, for example, I normally bring her out and just walk for 10 minutes to start, because just to get her a bit looser and relaxing in the walk. That would be what I would do with her to start, and then start doing some trot work, some bending, some stretching for about 10-15 minutes until she's fully warm. That would be in trot and canter. And then when she's warm, have a little walk and just try do your girth and everything else, so you're a bit more set up. And then it would sort of be taking the work up another level. So starting to think about some lateral work and making her engage her hind end a bit more, to become more through and uphill up to the bridle. And then any of the movements which you need to do in your dressage test, then that would be when I would start to practice some of those. So maybe some half passes or some leg yields, or some flying changes and that sort of thing. And then it's quite important as well to make sure you're aware of how long you've got to go before you go in. So if I had, I'd done all that and I still had 2 horses before I went in, which would be about 15 minutes, I'd come back and just practice some halts and just make sure she stayed switched on and with me. But you don't want to overcook a horse, otherwise they can go the other way and either get too excited or be too flat. So it's just important to get it right for your horse.
And for example, for a jumping course, jumping competition, how would you train and warm the horse in the warm-up arena?
Okay, so for me especially, not just for the horse, it's really important for me to get a good canter rhythm. It's something I struggled with as a younger rider, to make sure I have a really good rhythm for when I start jumping. Otherwise, I can be very slow at the beginning of a round. So that's something personally I have to do.
Okay.
But then for the horse, a good canter on each rein, and have a bit of a golden rule before I go into the show jumping. If I can't do a flying change each way, my canter's not good enough. And then I try not to jump a huge amount of fences in the show jumping warm-up. So maybe 1 cross pole, 2 uprights, 2 boxes, and then another tall upright before I go in. Because I'm a big believer, most of your work's done at home. By the time you're in the show jumping warm-up, you should be, it should just be body warming up and getting your eye in, and then the horse should be ready to go in. Shouldn't be doing anything last minute to jizz your horse up or anything else like that in the warm-up. It should all be very relaxing, straightforward, and just getting together.
What are the main key factors that for you a rider should consider to be able to adapt the warm-up to one specific horse or one specific training session?
So obviously, I think a very obvious one would be the age of the horse. If you had a 4-year-old horse, you've probably got a good 10-minute window after they've been warmed up for them to do some really good work. So you'd probably give their muscles a good warm up, just walk, trot and canter for 10 minutes, give them a few jumps, and then you've probably got 10 minutes before they're too tired to really do a good job. So obviously the age of the horse is a key factor, but also the temperament of the horse. If you're training at home, definitely the sharp ones probably need a bit more flat work before you jump them, so their bodies are really warm, and they're not still bombing around the arena before you're trying to jump. And I guess the other thing to consider is the atmosphere. If you're at a local show, then they're not going to get as wound up as if you're, going into the main arena at badminton. So those are probably the 3 most important things for me: the age, the temperament, and where you are.
Okay, and when exactly do you think, okay, it's fine, I can enter the arena now?
I guess for me, I have a bit of a plan every time before I go to a show. So especially at the big shows, you only have a certain number of horses before you go in, and then you have to go in on your time. But for me, is my horse warm? Is she happy? Is she confident? Has she done a few good jumps in the warm-up arena? I wouldn't say there's a certain point it would be different for every horse, but just when you feel like she's ready,
Yeah.
I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it does. Thank you very much, Libby. This was very, very interesting, enriching, and I'm sure that there are plenty of info that the listener will be interested in. Thanks a lot for your time. Thanks a lot for this episode.
No worries. Thanks, Lorelei.
If you want to dive further into Seaver technology, if you're looking forward to purchasing one of our devices, or if you just wish to learn more about horses' wellness and performance, visit our website and follow us on social networks. See you soon!